Welcome, traveler of mysteries. Tonight, let us drift together into the quiet of the ancient world, beyond the lapping waves of the Aegean and beneath the same stars that guided poets and philosophers. We will wander through stories of radiant chariots, shining shields in the sky, and whispered wonders preserved in marble and verse. Allow the gentle rhythm of history and myth to carry you into rest as we begin our journey under ancient stars. In the soft twilight over the Aegean, the sea turns to wine dark hues, a phrase the ancient poets used because no other description quite captured the way the Mediterranean shifts under fading light. Waves lap gently against stone harbors, where fishing boats creak in their moorings and nets dry in the salt-kissed air. Along the shoreline, torches are being lit one by one, their flames flickering against marble colonnades and temple steps polished by centuries of footsteps. The air carries the mingled scents of olive groves and sea spray, of wood smoke and burning incense rising from sanctuaries dedicated to gods who once seemed to stride across the heavens. Above it all stretches the eternal Mediterranean sky, a canopy so familiar, yet so boundless, that it has always invited wonder. The same constellations that guided the sailors of Crete and Rhodes, that led Homer's Odysseus homeward, still shine tonight with a serene brilliance. They seem unchanged by centuries, and yet they are not empty. In their expanse, the ancients told of things that defied expectation: radiant chariots drawn by flaming steeds, gleaming shields drifting above armies, fiery wheels that blazed across the firmament. These were not idle inventions, at least not to the men and women who first whispered them. To them they were reports of encounters, memories, omens that demanded reverence. Greek tradition is filled with gods who descend in dazzling vehicles. Homer sang of golden wheels rolling through the clouds. Hesiod spoke of celestial hierarchies, where each deity commanded radiant power. Historians like Herodotus and Plutarch preserved accounts of lights and signs that altered the course of battles, and later philosophers, Plato and Aristotle among them, wrestled with what such wonders meant for human understanding of the cosmos. Were these visions allegory, crafted to elevate story into myth, or did they preserve, in the poetic fabric of epic verse and the solemn prose of history, glimpses of something truly seen, something that lifted mortal eyes upward with awe? Tonight we will follow those questions into the quiet corridors of time. We will linger in candlelit libraries, where scribes bent over papyrus to record strange reports. We will walk among ruined temples whose stones still echo with ritual chants to gods who once appeared in radiant forms. We will listen to the philosophers debating beneath porticos, their words weaving explanations for a sky that seemed alive with presences. And we will pause, often, to simply breathe the atmosphere of an ancient Mediterranean evening, the sound of cicadas in groves outside the city walls, the glow of lamps along narrow streets, the hush of waves that has always lulled dreamers into sleep. This journey will not demand belief in any single interpretation. Instead, it will invite wonder. Some scholars see only myth and metaphor. Others, more cautious, allow for the possibility that ancient observers truly recorded aerial phenomena we still struggle to explain. Between certainty and speculation, lies a fertile ground of curiosity, the space where history, archaeology, and whispered tradition meet. As you listen, you are invited to rest into that space, to imagine yourself seated on a marble step beside the harbor, torchlight flickering at your side, gazing upward as the first stars emerge. The ancients are beside you, pointing to those same lights, telling their stories of fiery chariots and luminous shields. The night is calm, the sea eternal, and the sky vast with questions. And so our gentle exploration begins, under ancient stars, in the company of poets, historians, and philosophers who dared to describe what they saw. The same stars that shone upon Homer's heroes, upon Alexander's armies, and upon philosophers of Athens, still shine tonight above you. Their constancy is a comfort, their mysteries an invitation. Let them guide us into the quiet corridors of wonder, where myth, memory, and possibility drift together like constellations across the midnight sky. Chapter 1. The Poets Who Saw the Sky. In the dim firelight of an ancient hall, when winter winds pressed against wooden doors and shadows stretched long across polished floors, the voice of the rhapsode carried into the night. He sang of gods and heroes, of battles on plain and sea, and of chariots that did not run upon earth, but soared across the heavens. The Iliad and the Odyssey, preserved through centuries of oral performance before they were ever inked on parchment, contain more than the clash of spears and the longing for home. They hold images of divine aviation, of radiant steeds harnessed to golden wheels, of sudden descents from the sky, of movements too swift, too luminous to be entirely of this world. Consider the words used of Helios, the sun god, whose daily journey is described as a chariot racing across the firmament. His steeds blaze with fire, their hooves striking sparks as they run not upon soil, but through the open air. The very concept of the sun's chariot may seem symbolic to modern ears, but to Homer's audience it conveyed immediacy, an image of something seen, a radiant body, gliding from horizon to horizon, drawn with mechanical precision. Nightly the disappearance of this chariot below the earth invited questions about where it traveled, and by what hidden route it returned to rise again. The gods of the Iliad, too, appear not simply as distant figures, but as active presences descending in shining conveyances. Hera, Athena, and Apollo are described as arriving at the battlefield, borne upon radiant vehicles that glitter as they touch down. The descriptions are rich in sensory detail: golden reins, wheels of bronze, whirring sounds like wind or thunder. In one passage, a divine chariot is said to cause the very earth to tremble as it descends. In another, a figure clothed in light is described arriving as a hawk, swift through the clouds, suggesting aerial movement so sudden and controlled it felt technological to later readers. To the listeners gathered in firelit megarons, great halls where wine was poured and lyres played softly, these passages were more than decoration. The world they inhabited was already charged with omens and signs. Comets, eclipses, and sudden meteors were regarded as messages from the divine. A poet's image of a god's radiant chariot might have recalled to memory the streak of a fireball across the sky, or the gleam of strange light reflecting upon the sea. Oral tradition was not only a vehicle of myth, but a vessel for communal memory. What one generation witnessed as an unexplained brilliance, the next might recall in the cadence of verse. Modern scholars often debate whether Homer's imagery was metaphorical, intended to elevate the gods to splendid heights, or whether it preserved echoes of observations, lights in the sky, perhaps, that did not behave like stars or storms. The lines between poetry and experience blur in oral traditions. A bard reciting the Iliad in a village by torchlight may have drawn on the listener's own memories of celestial events, weaving them into the tapestry of divine action. To those who heard the words, the notion of golden chariots blazing across the firmament would not have been far-fetched. It would have resonated with things they themselves had seen and puzzled over. What endures across centuries is the vividness of these descriptions. Homer's gods did not glide vaguely, they moved with detail and precision, with light and sound. They came down, they ascended, they shone. Whether allegory or memory, the effect was the same, a sense that the skies above were alive with powers beyond ordinary human grasp. In those verses, performed again and again by generations of singers, the Mediterranean world learned to look upward with expectation. As the flames of the hearth dwindled and the bard's voice slowed, listeners may have gazed out through the smoke holes of the hall to where real stars flickered above the night sea. In that mingling of poetry and observation, myth and memory, the first Greek vision of flying chariots took root, not as abstract philosophy, but as a lived atmosphere of awe. If Homer gave the Greeks their heroes and radiant battles, it was Hesiod who sought to order the heavens. Writing in the 8th century BCE, not long after the Homeric age, he turned his gaze upward with a different intention. Where Homer embroidered experience into sweeping epics, Hesiod sought system. His theogony is not a tale of wandering or warfare, but a genealogy of the cosmos itself. A careful account of who dwelt in the skies, who commanded storms, who bore the light. In the theogony, chariots and radiant vehicles again appear, but now they are placed within a structured hierarchy. The Titans, the older deities, are described as forces of sky and earth, embodying the very movements of the firmament. From them emerged gods like Helios, Selene, and Eos, the sun, moon, and dawn, each with their own shining conveyances. Helios drives his flaming steeds each day across the dome of heaven. Selene, silver shining, follows in her radiant car by night, and Eos, rosy-fingered, heralds the day by rising in her own winged chariot of saffron light. Hesiod presents these not as casual metaphors, but as ordered realities within a cosmic lineage. His vision is almost that of an astronomer-poet, mapping divine machinery onto the rhythms of the visible sky. The daily procession of sun and moon, the sudden arrival of dawn's blush on the horizon, these are given the dignity of structured vehicles, each drawn by steeds or propelled by wheels of light. To the agricultural communities who recited Hesiod, these movements were practical as well as mystical. They marked sowing, harvest, and the cycles of life. In Works and Days, Hesiod's more personal poem of instruction and warning, celestial signs are presented as omens with tangible meaning. A certain star's rising signals the time to plow. The cry of a bird at dawn portends weather to come. Strange lights in the sky are read as warnings, woven into the farmer's calendar with as much seriousness as rainfall or frost. Here, the boundary between divine chariot and natural phenomenon narrows. A bright streak, a sudden glow, a halo around the moon, all are interpreted as communication, as though the sky itself were alive with intention. Some scholars suggest that Hesiod's careful cataloging reflects an age of transition, when myth was beginning to yield to observation, and when the Greeks first started to treat the heavens as a system. Yet even in this early attempt at rational order, the imagery of radiant vehicles persists. The gods still arrive in chariots, still ride upon luminous steeds, still move in ways that suggest not random storms, but deliberate conveyance. For the farmer listening to Hesiod's words in a humble courtyard, the message was clear. The skies were structured, and their movements were worth watching. It is possible, too, that Hesiod was preserving memories of phenomena beyond the ordinary. Atmospheric events, halos, meteors, luminous clouds, may have inspired his descriptions, but woven into his hierarchies are images so precise, so mechanical in tone, that later readers have wondered whether he was recording echoes of encounters. A shining car that glides silently across the night, a radiance that descends like a controlled flame, a presence that arrives not as weather, but as command. To dismiss these entirely as poetry is to miss their layered quality. Hesiod's authority in the Greek world was immense. Farmers, rulers, and even philosophers cited his verses as guidance. If Homer shaped the imagination, Hesiod shaped belief. His cosmic genealogy and his calendar of omens taught the Greeks not only who the gods were, but how to read the sky. In this way, the luminous chariots of the Theogony and the celestial signs of works and days were not merely literary devices. They were a practical framework for life, a guide to living in harmony with powers that seemed to move just above human reach. As dusk deepened in the valleys of Boeotia, where Hesiod tended sheep and composed his verses, the heavens unfolded with the same splendor seen in Homer's time. The shepherd looking up might not distinguish between a meteor and a god's fiery wheel. Both inspired awe, both carried meaning. In Hesiod's ordered cosmos, there was room for both. Poetry became system, and system preserved mystery. The sky was not chaos, but hierarchy. Its radiant chariots were not illusions, but markers of an order so vast it demanded reverence. Between Homer's soaring epics and Hesiod's careful hierarchies lies a space where poetry shades into observation. This is where the imagery of flaming chariots, golden wheels, and radiant descents may not be only allegory, but also memory, a poetic vessel carrying fragments of real phenomena witnessed in the Mediterranean skies. The Greeks lived under an open firmament, with no city lights to obscure the heavens. The night sky was a vast canvas, sharp and alive with detail. Meteors streaked across the black dome, comets lingered with ominous tails, auroras flickered faintly in northern reaches, and luminous halos encircled the moon after storms. For seafarers, shepherds, and farmers, these were not rare curiosities, but regular companions to life. What made them extraordinary was the interpretation. They were not random, but messages. They were not merely natural, but animated with intent. And so, when poets spoke of radiant chariots, listeners often thought of what they themselves had seen: lights gliding, hovering, or burning across the horizon. The oral tradition that preserved Greek poetry across generations was well suited to such memories. A bard did not invent entirely new images each time he performed. He worked within established formulae, repeating set phrases and motifs while shaping them for his audience. If a strange aerial phenomenon had once startled a village or a traveling army, its image could be folded into a verse, then retold and retold and retold until it was part of a god's story. Over time, the original sighting might blur, but the essence remained. The fiery chariot was not only metaphor, it was a remembered event, safeguarded in song. Consider how the Iliad describes gods descending in gleaming conveyances that stir the earth upon arrival. The detail of trembling ground, of a shockwave-like impact, has led some to speculate whether these passages recall more than symbolic grandeur. Could they be preserving echoes of thunderous aerial phenomena, the kind that rattles homes, bends trees, and leaves a sensory imprint too powerful to forget? To recite such imagery in a hall by firelight was not only to exalt the gods, but to anchor the verse in shared experience. Yes, a listener might murmur, I too saw a light that shook the sky. Hesiod's works and days strengthens this impression. When he links celestial signs to practical instruction, when to plow, when to harvest, when to heed the cry of a bird, he moves close to the role of observer, even recorder. His luminous chariots and ordered heavens become a kind of archive of sky watching. They are not precise in the sense of astronomy, but they preserve a cultural memory of what was seen and how it was valued. In Hesiod, poetic allegory leans gently toward empirical habit. Modern readers often separate myth from history, treating the one as imagination and the other as fact. Yet in the ancient world, the two were intertwined. A comet blazing across the night was not explained away as an astronomical body. It was woven into the myth of a god's fiery passage. A bright disk glimpsed above an army was not dismissed as reflection. It became a sign of divine favor. This fusion of observation and story is what gave Greek poetry its enduring richness. It was not merely entertainment, but a way of encoding memory, meaning, and wonder. And so when we hear of flying chariots in Homer and Hesiod, we may listen with two sets of ears. One hears the allegory, the metaphor, the exalted poetry of gods. The other hears whispers of witnesses, of real eyes gazing upward at something they could not explain, retelling what they saw until it became woven into epic verse. In that fusion lies the true power of Greek poetry, not only to imagine, but to remember. As the first chapter of our journey draws to a close, we stand with those poets on the threshold of history and myth. The fire has burned low, the lyre strings have softened, and outside the Megaron, the night sky still stretches vast and silent. The radiant chariots remain there, suspended between imagination and observation, between memory and metaphor. They are not lost. They live in the verses, waiting for us to read them again with wonder. Chapter 2: Historians and the Evidence of Sky Signs. When the poets gave way to historians, the sky did not fall silent. If anything, the descriptions grew more sober, more deliberate, more concerned with evidence. Among the first to attempt such a balance was Herodotus of Halicarnassus, often called the father of history. Writing in the 5th century BCE, Herodotus did not merely weave tales, he gathered testimonies. He traveled, listened, compared, and then preserved accounts in prose that tried, however imperfectly, to weigh credibility. And in those writings, the heavens often appear. Herodotus's Histories is remembered chiefly for its sweeping account of the Persian Wars, when Greek city-states fought to preserve their freedom against the vast empire of Xerxes. Yet woven into his military and political narratives are references to celestial omens, signs seen above armies, and strange phenomena interpreted as divine messages. To the Greeks of his day, no campaign was complete without portents in the sky, no battle understood without considering the heavens. Before the great invasion of Greece, Herodotus records that Persians and Greeks alike witnessed luminous forms in the air, visions taken as encouragement or warning, depending on one's allegiance. At times, blazing lights appeared unexpectedly, interpreted as the gods favoring one side. At other times, shields of fire were said to hover above battle lines, lingering long enough for soldiers to murmur their awe. Herodotus does not describe these phenomena with the rhapsodic cadence of Homer, but with a quieter matter-of-factness. Such was seen, he reports, and the people considered it a sign. His task was not to embellish, but to document. Cross-cultural echoes enrich his accounts. While in Persia, Herodotus heard tales of strange lights in the sky, seen by magi and priests, often interpreted as signs of royal destiny. The Greeks, too, spoke of similar occurrences: fiery wheels, glowing discs, aerial apparitions before decisive moments. These parallels suggest a broader ancient pattern. Across regions, human eyes watched the heavens, not as passive spectators, but as interpreters of a grand and living stage. What makes Herodotus particularly compelling is his method. He often cites multiple versions of an event, weighing them without declaring absolute truth. When he writes of aerial signs, he acknowledges their strangeness, then moves forward, leaving readers to decide whether to treat them as divine, natural, or fabricated. His honesty about uncertainty makes his testimony more enduring. He does not dismiss the phenomena, he records them, placing them alongside the deeds of kings and the clash of armies. In doing so, he shows us that to his world, the heavens were as much a part of history as the earth beneath marching feet. We may imagine him in the agora, listening to veterans of Marathon recall the luminous forms they claimed to see above the field. Some said they were gods intervening, others muttered of unknown forces. Herodotus, with his careful curiosity, preserved both accounts. Perhaps he saw himself not as a judge, but as a custodian of memory. Even if uncertain, these stories mattered because people believed them. Modern readers might see only myth in these descriptions, or else natural events, comets, meteors, auroras. Yet the phrasing often suggests something more deliberate. Shields in the sky are not meteors, for meteors do not linger. Wheels of fire are not lightning, for lightning does not hover. Herodotus, cautious as he was, chose words that pointed to phenomena that defied easy categorization. He left them unexplained, as if respecting the boundary between what could be recorded and what could be understood. In this way, Herodotus stands at the threshold between myth and history. Where Homer made gods race through the clouds, Herodotus documented men who believed they had seen signs from the sky. Where Hesiod ordered divine hierarchies, Herodotus ordered testimonies. The transition marks a shift, but not a dismissal. The skies still mattered, still spoke, still sent their strange brilliance across the Mediterranean world. And so, the father of history looks up with us, reminding us that human memory is not limited to earthbound deeds. It stretches also to the heavens, where luminous forms once traced their paths above battlefields and cities, leaving men and women to wonder what powers guided their fates. Centuries after Herodotus, another Greek thinker turned his gaze toward the intersection of history and the heavens. Plutarch of Chaeronea writing in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, was less concerned with sweeping chronicles and more with the character of great men. His parallel lives pairs Greek and Roman figures, examining how virtue, fortune, and decision shaped their destinies. Yet within these biographies are curious glimmers of the sky, moments when leaders and common soldiers alike paused to look upward, unsettled by what they saw. Plutarch approached his craft as both historian and philosopher. He was deeply interested in how extraordinary signs influenced the choices of leaders. When recounting battles, he did not hesitate to note when unusual phenomena appeared above the field. Sometimes it was described as fire, other times as luminous objects resembling shields or globes. These were not decorative flourishes, but details that shaped the psychology of those present. A general might interpret a fiery apparition as divine sanction. A soldier might see the same and find his courage renewed. In either case, the unexplained light became part of the outcome. One striking account comes from his life of Lysander, where he records strange signs seen in the heavens before a naval encounter. Witnesses spoke of fiery forms racing above the sea, gliding in ways that resembled neither stars nor storms. Plutarch notes the event without embellishment, leaving readers to recognize the effect such visions must have had on men about to risk their lives on open waters. To Lysander's sailors, the appearance was no idle spectacle. It was an omen, a signal that the gods were watching. Elsewhere, in his life of Alexander, Plutarch mentions heavenly portents that accompanied the conqueror's campaigns. At times, radiant globes appeared above armies, moving with deliberate pace. Soldiers interpreted these as signs of divine favor. Alexander himself, a man attuned to symbols, often acted as though guided by them. Whether the phenomena were natural or not, they became woven into the psychology of conquest, reinforcing the belief that destiny itself traveled with the Macedonian king. Plutarch's value lies in his refusal to dismiss. Unlike poets who sang in metaphor, or philosophers who sought rational order, Plutarch faithfully preserved what witnesses claimed to have seen. His interest was in how these visions affected human behavior, but by including them at all, he ensured they would not be lost to silence. Without him, we might know little of the luminous shapes reported above battles or the fiery wheels observed by soldiers. His prose, sober yet respectful, became an archive of aerial encounters, otherwise too strange to endure. In the quiet of Chaeronea, where he lived much of his life, Plutarch would have known skies as clear and brilliant as those of Homer's age. When he recorded aerial apparitions, he was not dealing with abstractions. These were events reported by men of rank and memory, woven into the very texture of their lives. The philosopher in him may have sought meaning, the historian in him sought preservation. Between the two, the skies of antiquity retained their mystery. To read Plutarch today is to sense that same balance. He does not insist on belief, nor does he dismiss with ridicule. He places the phenomenon gently before us, much as he placed the virtues and faults of his subjects. In doing so, he allows us to glimpse how the ancients themselves encountered the unexplained, not as idle curiosity, but as a living influence on decisions of war and peace. Thus, through Plutarch's pages, the luminous apparitions of antiquity remain part of history's weave. They are neither lost to allegory, nor erased by skepticism. They persist as remembered moments when human eyes looked upward and found the sky alive with presence, as though unseen forces drifted just beyond the reach of reason. Though Roman by citizenship and audience, Titus Livy was deeply indebted to the traditions of Greece. Writing in the 1st century BCE, his vast history Ab Urbe Condita drew on Greek chronicles as much as Roman memory, preserving for posterity countless details that might otherwise have been lost. Among them are striking accounts of aerial phenomena, moments when the sky itself seemed to bear witness to human conflict. These episodes, often overlooked in favor of his political narrative, are among the most tantalizing clues we have to how ancient observers described what we might now call unidentified aerial phenomena. Livy speaks frequently of signa in calo, signs in the sky. Sometimes they are described as shields of fire, round and luminous, drifting above the battlefield. Other times he notes globes of light or phantom ships that seem to sail across the heavens. His words are simple, almost clinical, yet their strangeness reverberates. At Arpi he records, shields were seen in the sky. Nothing more, no embellishment. But for soldiers and citizens, such a statement carried immense weight. Aerial shields could mean divine favor, impending disaster, or an omen so profound that public rituals were required to restore balance. Many of these accounts, though preserved by Livy in a Roman context, had Greek origins. Roman historians often relied on earlier Hellenic sources, especially for episodes set in southern Italy and the wider Mediterranean. In these crossovers, the imagery is consistent: bright disks, radiant forms, hovering lights that linger long enough to be witnessed by crowds. That consistency suggests a continuity of description across cultures, as though Greeks and Romans alike reached for the same metaphors to describe the inexplicable: shields, ships, chariots. These were the most familiar analogies for radiant, controlled forms moving in the heavens. Modern interpreters sometimes reduce Livy's sky signs to meteors or comets, and indeed some may well have been, but the accounts of hovering shields trouble such explanations. Meteors do not pause. Comets do not drift low across battlefields. The language suggests movement that is deliberate, controlled, and unlike ordinary celestial phenomena. Livy himself does not attempt natural explanation. He simply records, then notes the response: sacrifices, prayers, consultations with augurs. For the Romans, as for the Greeks before them, the sky was not inert. It was alive with signs that demanded ritual attention. What is most striking is the persistence of this pattern. From Homer's golden chariots to Hesiod's ordered vehicles, from Herodotus's luminous omens to Plutarch's fiery apparitions, and finally to Livy's aerial shields, the Mediterranean world continually saw and recorded forms that defied ordinary understanding. Each generation used the vocabulary it knew best. For Greeks it was chariots and wheels. For Romans, martial imagery of shields and ships felt most natural, yet the phenomenon beneath the imagery seems uncannily consistent: luminous, round, radiant, and inexplicably present in the sky. Imagine, for a moment, a Roman soldier on campaign in southern Italy. The night is heavy with anticipation, the battlefield quiet but tense. Then above the horizon appears a round, glowing form, not a star, not the moon, but something nearer, larger, alive with fire. It drifts, it lingers, and every man sees it. The murmurs pass quickly: a shield of Mars, a sign from Jupiter. The historian, gathering testimonies later, writes simply, shields were seen in the sky. But for those who stood beneath, it was a memory seared into the imagination, retold at firesides for years. Livy's chronicles therefore serve as both history and preservation. He may not have intended to record unexplained aerial encounters, yet by faithfully copying what his sources described, he ensured these fragments endured. Today they stand as echoes of Greek and Roman witnesses, who long before the age of telescopes or aircraft looked upward and saw something they could not explain. Their voices, channeled through Livy's pen, remind us that mystery has always been part of the human encounter with the heavens. Chapter 3: The Gods and Their Flying Machines. When the Greeks lifted their eyes to the rising sun, they did not see an abstract ball of fire. They saw a radiant god, Apollo, steering a golden chariot drawn by fiery steeds across the heavens. Each dawn was his departure, each dusk his return. To modern minds, this imagery rests easily in the category of myth. Yet to the ancients, the description carried more immediacy. The daily journey of the sun was evidence of a power both visible and mechanical, something so reliable it became a foundation of life itself. In Homeric hymns and later classical poetry, Apollo's chariot is described with gleaming precision: golden wheels that blaze with light, steeds whose hooves spark flames, reins that glitter as they cut through the air. These are not vague impressions, but detailed images of movement, structure, and propulsion. Apollo does not drift across the sky. He drives with direction, speed, and force. The language suggests more than a metaphor of warmth. It suggests a vehicle, radiant, powerful, and controlled. The idea of the sun as a moving machine was not unique to Greece. In Egypt, the solar barque carried Ra across the sky. In Mesopotamia, Shamash traveled in a radiant vessel. What is striking in the Greek imagination is the specificity of mechanical detail: wheels, axles, reins, and the sense of controlled flight. One could almost hear the whir of motion, the clatter of unseen machinery behind the glowing facade. Apollo's chariot, luminous though it was, behaved as a vehicle should. It departed, it traveled, it returned. The poet Pindar, writing in the 5th century BCE, evokes Apollo's radiant journey with reverence, describing not only his chariot, but the impact of his presence. Fields stir, seas shimmer, temples glow with renewed fire. This is not merely light, but energy radiating with purpose. Some modern interpreters have wondered if such descriptions encode more than symbolism. Could ancient eyes have glimpsed something in the heavens that moved with radiant brilliance, leading them to imagine a divine pilot guiding it daily? At Delphi, Apollo's most sacred sanctuary, his chariot imagery intertwined with prophecy. The Pythia, inhaling vapors in the temple, was said to speak with the god who traversed the skies each day. Strange lights and atmospheric disturbances were sometimes reported at Delphi, described in later texts as signs of Apollo's favor. If luminous phenomena appeared at sacred hours, it was natural to imagine they belonged to the god's radiant journey. For the Greeks, Apollo's chariot was not distant metaphor, it was visible reassurance of his presence. In philosophical circles, the imagery took on new depth. Plato, in his reflections on the heavens, spoke of the ordered movement of celestial bodies as if guided by rational intelligence. The sun's chariot could be seen as a metaphor for cosmic law, but perhaps also as a poetic veil for something more technological in memory. For Aristotle, the sun was a fiery body, yet he too used the language of vehicles and spheres to describe its precise course. Even as natural philosophy grew, The image of Apollo's radiant transport lingered. The psychological power of Apollo's chariot lay in its constancy. Every morning it rose. Every evening it returned. That reliability gave the Greeks a sense of cosmic order, but its radiant brilliance and apparent structure gave it the aura of advanced machinery. To stand on a headland at dawn, to watch the disk of the sun rise blazing from the horizon, was to glimpse something that felt more than natural. It was arrival. It was the opening of gates. It was a vehicle bringing light and life to the world. As day unfolded, the chariot was never absent from thought. Farmers marked its position for planting and harvest. Sailors read its angle for navigation. Poets exalted its brilliance, and philosophers pondered its mystery. Apollo's solar technology, whether divine or symbolic, became the most enduring image of aerial conveyance in Greek imagination. The god did not walk, he did not simply appear. He arrived in radiant machinery, crossing the heavens in a journey that could be timed, traced, and revered. And when the fiery disk slipped beneath the horizon, the ancients did not imagine it extinguished. They believed Apollo continued his journey through hidden paths, to return again at dawn. The chariot never ceased, the machinery never stopped. It was the most constant, most reliable aerial vehicle of all, and perhaps the first great flying machine recorded in the Western imagination. If Apollo ruled the sky through constancy and light, Zeus commanded it through power and sudden force. The king of the gods was not portrayed gliding serenely in radiant vehicles, but arriving with storm and thunder, hurling weapons that split the heavens. His thunderbolts were feared as much as they were revered, luminous projectiles cast from the heights of Olympus, accompanied by rolling echoes that shook mountains and seas. To the ancient Greeks, Zeus was not only the Lord of heaven, he was the wielder of an arsenal that seemed both divine and technological. In Homer's Iliad, Zeus is described grasping his thunderbolts with hands that blaze, hurling them downward in arcs that pierce battle lines. The detail is often mechanical rather than mystical. The bolt is not a vague flash, but a shaped weapon, a shaft of fire, sometimes triple-forked, always deliberate. Its path is precise, its impact devastating. The effect is not of random storm lightning, but of targeted energy. Soldiers on the plain saw not merely weather, but a sign of supreme control, a weapon guided rather than unleashed. Classical poets often linger on the glow surrounding Zeus's presence. His descent is accompanied by brightness, flashes that illuminate the night, and a roaring that suggests more than simple thunder. Some hymns describe the sky trembling as though struck by an immense vibration. The impression is almost electromagnetic, a charged atmosphere that tingled on the skin, a pressure that preceded the bolt itself. Witnesses may have stood in awe, not only of the brilliance, but of the sensation of force pressing against their bodies. Later philosophers tried to reconcile these images with natural explanation. Aristotle, for instance, described thunder and lightning as the clash of dry exhalations in the clouds, sparks ignited by friction. Yet even in such rational analysis, the metaphor of weaponry remained. The phenomenon was not random, but purposeful, echoing the imagery of Zeus's targeted bolts. For ordinary Greeks, the distinction mattered little. To see lightning arc downward in a sudden blinding flash was to believe the god had chosen a target. There are accounts, preserved in later compilations, of fire falling from heaven in ways that resemble directed energy more than natural storm. At times, luminous bolts were said to strike without accompanying rain or cloud, descending from clear skies as though discharged from unseen heights. These were feared as omens, punishments, or divine warnings. Temples built to Zeus often housed dedications from those who survived such strikes, offerings of bronze or stone shaped like thunderbolts, acknowledging the mysterious precision of the phenomenon. The arsenal of Zeus may also reflect an ancient attempt to describe technologies they could not name. A beam of light, sudden and destructive, a vibration that shook the air, a blinding radiance followed by smoldering ground. These elements read like reports of advanced weaponry, cloaked in myth. Whether witnessed as unusual natural phenomena or as something beyond, the impression remained. Zeus commanded an energy that was both radiant and lethal. On Mount Olympus, his throne was imagined as surrounded by storm clouds and radiant fire. From there he surveyed the world, ready to release his arsenal at will. The imagery aligns closely with descriptions of aerial platforms, bases suspended in the sky, launching forces downward in brilliant arcs. To the Greeks, this was divine supremacy. To modern readers, it stirs questions about what ancient eyes truly saw, yet the psychological effect was paramount. To believe Zeus stood ready with his arsenal kept order in both city and battlefield. His weapons could not be resisted, they could only be appeased. Sacrifices, rituals, and prayers became ways to divert his bolts, to redirect his precision away from human targets. The imagery thus reinforced not only awe but obedience. In the end, Zeus's thunderbolts endure as one of antiquity's most vivid images of controlled energy. Whether as allegory for storm or as memory of something stranger, they represent a technology of the skies, luminous, forceful, deliberate. In the imagination of the Greeks, their king of gods was not merely a ruler, but a master of atmospheric power, armed with weapons that still spark wonder when described today. If Apollo embodied radiant constancy and Zeus thunderous force, Athena's presence was subtler, sharper, and often described in terms of sudden illumination. The goddess of wisdom and war strategy did not overwhelm the senses with storms or daily solar journeys. Instead, she appeared in moments of crisis, gleaming with light that startled witnesses into clarity. Her interventions suggest not only divinity, but also surveillance, as though Athena descended from above to observe, guide, and alter outcomes at decisive moments. In the Iliad, Athena often descends to battlefields wrapped in brightness. She does not always arrive with a chariot, though some accounts mention a radiant conveyance of her own. More often, she is described as shimmering, her armor glowing with a light so intense it blinds her enemies. At one point, Homer describes her as standing beside Achilles, her form like a star, gleaming above the field. Such imagery suggests controlled radiance, not the random glow of fire, but a focused brilliance that disorients some and empowers others. Her role as counselor and strategist gives her appearances a distinctive texture. Athena seldom hurls thunderbolts or commands vast solar chariots. Instead, she manifests to whisper in the ear of a commander, to grant courage to a wavering soldier, or to appear above the field as a gleaming sign of divine intelligence. Ancient depictions often show her holding a spear tipped with light, or a shield that gleams like polished bronze catching the sun. These images may be artistic, yet they echo descriptions of radiant devices that seem to shimmer with their own power. One fascinating aspect of Athena's luminous interventions is their precision. She does not flood the world with overwhelming radiance like Apollo, nor scatter destructive bolts like Zeus. Instead, her light is directed, purposeful. She appears to one soldier, blinds another, or places a sudden glow upon the battlefield that shifts morale. This focus gives her presence the quality of targeted surveillance, as if her gleam were a spotlight cutting through chaos, illuminating exactly where it was needed. Later writers describe Athena's manifestations not only in war, but in moments of civic importance. She was said to descend during the founding of cities, offering guidance through sudden visions of brightness or dreamlike encounters where she appeared radiant, clothed in shimmering garments. At the Acropolis in Athens, votive inscriptions record thanks for glimpses of the goddess, seen as gleaming forms above the city. These accounts hint at experiences beyond myth, moments when citizens believed they had truly seen something luminous suspended above them, interpreted as their patron deity. Philosophers sometimes reflected on her role as intelligence embodied in light. To appear suddenly, gleaming with radiance, was a way of saying that wisdom itself could pierce darkness. Yet, when read closely, the descriptions again suggest controlled light phenomena, flashes, glows, sudden appearances that vanished as quickly as they arrived. Aerial lights that come and go with precision resemble not only allegory, but also testimony. Athena's reputation for surveillance is also notable. She was the goddess who watched, who knew, who counseled with foresight. Many myths describe her as all-seeing, a phrase that resonates with the imagery of an observer descending from the sky, watching events unfold, and intervening only when necessary. If Zeus ruled with fear, and Apollo with constancy, Athena influenced through intelligence gathering, subtle radiance, and timely guidance. For the Greeks, these luminous interventions reinforced trust in their patroness. A soldier who glimpsed a sudden gleam above the battlefield could feel renewed courage, certain that Athena herself had descended to oversee their struggle. A statesman who dreamed of her shining form might believe his policies carried divine wisdom. The glow of her presence, subtle yet unmistakable, wove itself into the fabric of Greek confidence in both war and peace. Thus, Athena's appearances may be seen as more than symbolic. They carry echoes of surveillance, guidance, and radiant technology expressed through divine metaphor. She does not overwhelm or destroy, but illuminates and directs. The goddess of wisdom moved through the skies, not with the bombast of thunder or the blaze of the sun, but with the focused glow of intelligence, luminous interventions that reassured, guided, and inspired those who saw her. Chapter 4: Sacred Temples and Celestial Visitations. At the foot of Mount Parnassus, where olive groves ripple down toward the Gulf of Corinth, lies the sanctuary of Delphi, a place the Greeks regarded as the very navel of the world. Here, amid marble colonnades and the rising smoke of sacrifice, the voice of the gods was said to reach mortals most clearly. The oracle of Apollo, the Pythia, sat upon her tripod, inhaling sacred vapors and speaking words that shaped kings' decisions, armies' fates, and cities' destinies. To stand in Delphi was to stand at a crossroads of earth and sky, where messages descended not only through words, but sometimes, according to ancient testimony, through luminous signs above the temple itself. Accounts describe strange lights at Delphi, glows upon the mountainside, sudden radiances in the night, atmospheric disturbances that startled pilgrims waiting their turn. Some said the god announced himself not only in the trance of the Pythia, but in aerial phenomena seen by crowds, a star-like brilliance hovering above the temple, a gleam that seemed to linger over the sacred precinct, or a sudden flash upon the horizon interpreted as a sign of Apollo's presence. These manifestations reinforced the sanctity of the place. Here, the god of light and prophecy revealed himself in ways visible as well as audible. The sanctuary's very setting lent itself to mystery. Surrounded by cliffs, its terraces looked out over a vast landscape of mountains and sea. In the stillness of dawn, with incense curling upward and votive offerings glinting in the first light, even a natural glow on the horizon could seem supernatural. But testimony suggests more than natural beauty. Pilgrims wrote of radiant spheres that appeared during ceremonies, of faint sounds in the air, like distant lyres accompanying flashes of light. The temple's priests and guardians often took these as confirmation that Apollo was present, his chariot or radiant form descending to bless the oracle's words. In the ancient mindset, prophecy was never detached from signs. When the Pythia spoke, her words were measured against celestial events. An eclipse, a sudden star, a glow upon the temple roof, all were integrated into the reading of Apollo's will. The Greeks did not separate vision from voice. The sky itself was a page upon which the god wrote his commentary. Thus, Delphi became not only a center of spoken oracle, but of sky communications, where messages from above were anticipated as part of ritual. Some modern scholars suggest that volcanic gases rising from fissures beneath the temple may have produced light effects, luminous vapors, or even mild hallucinations in observers. Yet even if natural, these phenomena were experienced communally as direct signs of Apollo. Others point to atmospheric optics, halos, glories, and reflections upon the cliffs that could create glowing forms above the sanctuary. To the ancients, these did not diminish the oracle's power, but enhanced it. Nature itself seemed enlisted by the god to affirm his presence. Yet there remains in the accounts a note of precision difficult to explain away. Descriptions of hovering lights, of radiant forms that moved deliberately above the temple precinct, do not fit neatly into atmospheric phenomena. They resemble other reports across the Mediterranean of luminous chariots, discs, and shields. Delphi's uniqueness was to interpret them directly as Apollo's arrival, a celestial confirmation of the oracle's authority. Imagine standing in the temple courtyard, torchlight flickering on marble, while pilgrims wait in hushed anticipation. The Pythia begins her chant, her words half-formed yet powerful. Suddenly a gleam appears above the temple roof, a radiant orb lingering in silence. A murmur passes through the crowd. Apollo is here. The moment imprints itself upon memory, told and retold until it becomes part of Delphi's sacred reputation. For centuries, pilgrims returned not only for the Pythia's words, but for the possibility of witnessing the god's skyward signs. Delphi was thus more than a sanctuary of prophecy. It was an observatory of the mysterious heavens, where earthbound questions met celestial answers, and where the line between divine message and aerial phenomenon blurred into wonder. If Delphi was the open voice of prophecy, the sanctuary of Eleusis was the keeper of silence. For nearly 2,000 years, initiates gathered each autumn to partake in the Eleusinian mysteries, secret rites honoring Demeter and Persephone, the mother and daughter whose myth explained both the fertility of the fields and the shadow of mortality. To enter the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, was to step into an experience so sacred that even under threat of death, participants were forbidden to reveal what they saw. Yet scattered references, inscriptions, and whispered accounts suggest that light itself, radiant, inexplicable, overwhelming, played a central role. Ancient sources speak of a sudden blaze filling the temple at the climax of the rites. A dazzling brilliance, described as unlike torch or fire, poured through the chamber, illuminating faces and columns with a radiance that seemed to come from nowhere. Cicero, the Roman statesman who was himself initiated, later wrote that the mysteries allowed one to see things as they truly are. Plutarch hinted that light phenomena accompanied sacred visions. Others mentioned the appearance of divine figures, luminous and majestic, descending as if from above. What exactly the initiates experienced is debated. Some scholars suggest staged effects, hidden torches, polished bronze mirrors, or burning resins that could create sudden bursts of light. Yet these explanations falter before the intensity of the descriptions. Initiates spoke of revelations so overwhelming that they transformed their understanding of life and death. The radiance was not simply theatrical, it was felt, experienced as divine presence, a visitation from realms beyond. The imagery aligns closely with the broader Greek tradition of luminous arrivals from the sky. Just as Homer spoke of gods descending in gleaming chariots, so too the initiates of Eleusis described radiant beings who appeared in moments of sacred climax. For them, the visions were not metaphors, they were encounters, glimpses of a hidden order, usually veiled from mortal eyes. The mysteries promised more than agricultural renewal. They offered personal assurance that the soul could ascend after death, guided by luminous powers glimpsed in the ritual. In the secrecy of the telesterion, hundreds could witness these visions together. Imagine standing in the vast hall, torchlight flickering along stone walls. The hymn to Demeter fades. Suddenly the chamber floods with unearthly light, brighter than any flame. Figures gleam, perhaps indistinct, yet radiant with presence. Some see a goddess descending, others a shining chariot. The air feels charged, as if the very atmosphere hums with energy. Then, as quickly as it came, the brilliance fades, leaving awe and silence. The memory endures for a lifetime, spoken of only in hints to the uninitiated. For the Greeks, such experiences confirmed that their myths were not just stories, but realities glimpsed through ritual. The descent of Persephone from the underworld, the return of Demeter's gift of grain, the cycle of life and death, all were dramatized and revealed through luminous encounters. Some initiates reported visions of fields of light, radiant landscapes beyond death, populated by shining beings. Whether symbolic or literal, the imagery echoes across cultures that describe encounters with luminous figures in states of altered consciousness. Modern interpreters have speculated about the use of sacred drink, the kaikon, possibly containing psychoactive properties that heightened perception. Others focus on the architecture of the telesterion, designed to amplify light effects, but for the initiates, explanation mattered little. What they experienced was real, and it reshaped their relationship to mortality. The brilliance was proof of the soul's journey, confirmation that death was not an end, but a transition guided by radiant powers. Thus the Eleusinian mysteries preserved another strand of Greece's luminous heritage. Delphi's pilgrims saw radiant signs above the temple. Eleusis' initiates saw radiant beings within sacred walls, Both sanctuaries testified that the gods did not merely dwell in distant heavens, they descended in light, revealing themselves in flashes of brilliance that mortals carried forever in memory. While Delphi and Eleusis preserve their mysteries in words and ritual, the stones of Greece also whisper of celestial encounters. Across temples, votive offerings, and carved reliefs, archaeologists have uncovered images and inscriptions that hint at luminous visitations. These fragments may not shout their meaning, but in their quiet presence, they suggest that the Greeks recorded in art what they struggled to describe in language, encounters with radiant forms that defied ordinary explanation. On the metopes of certain temples, faint engravings depict figures not only descending from clouds, but accompanied by circular or wheel-like forms. In Olympia, fragments of terracotta reliefs show gods standing beside what appear to be discs, rays emanating outward in deliberate symmetry. Whether purely symbolic or echoes of skyward observation, such imagery reflects the same vocabulary found in poetry and history: shields, wheels, radiant circles. The artists, like the poets, reached for familiar shapes to represent phenomena that may have appeared unfamiliar. Votive offerings also bear witness. In sanctuaries across Attica and Boeotia, archaeologists have discovered small bronze models shaped like wheels or discs, sometimes inscribed with thanks for deliverance or guidance. To dedicate such an object suggests that the worshipper had seen or experienced something luminous overhead, and in gratitude crafted a miniature to leave before the altar. These offerings, humble though they seem, embody lived testimony, fragments of encounters that once stirred awe in ordinary lives. Inscriptions occasionally record more direct hints. A marble stele from the 4th century BCE speaks of a gleam in the heavens, brighter than fire, offered as proof of divine favor to a particular family. Another fragment mentions a shining form, like a shield, seen above the city walls, interpreted as Athena's protection. The language mirrors the historical accounts of Herodotus and Livy, yet here it appears not in literature, but carved for ritual memory. The stone preserves what the eye saw, carrying it forward through generations. Even architectural design seems to suggest attention to the skies. The orientation of many temples aligns with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of significant stars. At certain dawns, the first light would pour directly into the sanctuary, illuminating the cult statue in a blaze of brilliance. While this alignment could be symbolic, it also mimicked the sudden radiant arrivals described in myth. To stand in a temple at sunrise, watching the god's image ignite in golden light, was to reenact a visitation from above. Architecture itself became a mechanism for summoning the luminous. Some archaeologists remain cautious, noting that these details can be explained by symbolism, agricultural calendars, or simple artistic convention. Yet the repetition of forms, circles, discs, radiant shields, across centuries and sites, suggests a deeper pattern. The Greeks consistently reached for these images to embody their sense of the divine sky. Whether born of imagination, ritual, or direct observation, the result is the same: a cultural memory of luminous presences above and around them. To walk today through the ruins of a temple is to feel that whisper, a weathered relief, a half-buried votive, a faint inscription worn by centuries of rain. Each carries a trace of someone's attempt to capture an encounter. The stones do not speak loudly, but their silence is charged. They stand as testimony not only to ritual devotion, but to a world where the heavens were alive with presence. Thus, in the material remains of Greece, we glimpse a continuity with the poems, the oracles, and the mysteries. Words described radiant chariots, rituals enacted luminous descents, stones preserved the images of shields, discs, and gleams. Together they form a chorus across time. The gods, or something beyond, came down in light. Chapter 5. Philosophers and the Machinery of Heaven. Among the philosophers of Greece, none has left as deep an imprint on the Western imagination as Plato. His dialogues wander from ethics to politics, from the soul to the stars. Yet beneath the abstract reasoning lies a fascination with structure, the conviction that the cosmos itself is ordered like an intelligent design. In his myths and metaphors, the heavens often take on the qualities of machines, vehicles of the soul, radiant structures guiding destiny, and technologies of flight, glimpsed through the veil of philosophy. One of the most striking passages appears in the Republic, where Plato tells the myth of Here a soldier named dies in battle, only to revive on the funeral pyre with memories of the afterlife. What he describes is astonishing. A vast spindle of necessity, a cosmic mechanism turning with the harmony of the spheres. The souls of men, choosing new lives, are drawn upward in radiant conveyances, carried by the revolutions of the universe itself. The imagery is mechanical, almost astronomical. A spindle, cords, revolving wheels, and luminous movement. This is not chaotic dream, but structured flight. Some interpreters have seen in it a symbolic vision of cosmic order, others, a faint echo of technologies too strange for plain description. Plato's writings on Atlantis, though brief, also suggest advanced powers once known to humankind. The lost civilization, he says, commanded great technologies before pride led to its fall. Among the scattered hints are references to control over the seas and skies, powers of movement and conveyance that sound less like simple metaphor and more like recollection. If we read these not as inventions but as philosophical memory, they align with broader traditions of ancient aerial machines described in myth. Elsewhere, in the Phaedrus, Plato speaks of the soul as a charioteer guiding winged horses across the heavens. The imagery is poetic, yet precise. The soul rises and falls according to the strength of its wings, drawn upward into radiant realms where truth is visible. The vehicle of the soul has resonated through centuries, not merely as metaphor, but as a suggestion that flight and ascent are part of humanity's deepest longing. For initiates of Plato's Academy, such images may have evoked not only allegory, but the faint memory of luminous chariots spoken of by poets and historians. Plato's concern with cosmic order also extended to astronomy. In the Timaeus, he presents a vision of the universe as a living creature, crafted by a divine craftsman, the Demiurge. The planets, he explains, are guided in ordered courses, their movements harmonized like parts of a celestial mechanism. The imagery of wheels, spheres, and revolutions again echoes the language of technology. To Plato, the heavens were not random. They were engineered. Their machinery might be divine, but it was machinery nonetheless. What makes Plato unique is his ability to weave myth and reason into a single tapestry. He did not dismiss luminous vehicles as mere fancy, nor did he accept them uncritically. Instead, he translated them into philosophical terms, the machinery of the cosmos, the conveyances of the soul, the lost technologies of Atlantis. In doing so, he preserved the imagery of flight and radiant chariots, while embedding them in a framework that spoke to rational minds. Imagine him at the Academy in Athens, walking among olive trees with his students. The stars begin to appear above, and he gestures to the heavens. Behold the order, he might say. See how the spheres turn as if by design. The soul too has its vehicle, drawn upward by wings. For the students, the moment fused philosophy with experience. The night sky itself seemed a living machine, its lights wheeling like parts of an immense design. Thus in Plato we find not only abstract theory, but echoes of ancient aerial imagery transformed into philosophy. The gods' radiant chariots become cosmic engineering. The soul's ascent becomes a flight in luminous vehicles. The universe itself becomes a machine, harmonized, purposeful, and radiant. In this way, Plato carried forward the heritage of Homer and Hesiod, but clothed it in reasoned dialogue, ensuring that the mystery of the skies would endure as both wonder and wisdom. Where Plato clothed the heavens in myth and ideal forms, his student Aristotle sought to strip them of mystery. In his quest for systematic knowledge, he examined the sky with a sharper, more analytical eye. To Aristotle, the universe was not chaos nor imagination, but a structure governed by natural causes. Yet even in his rigorous pursuit of explanation, he encountered phenomena that did not yield easily to reason. Sudden lights, fiery wheels, and luminous apparitions that Greeks had long described in poetry and ritual. His writings attempt to place these anomalies within the framework of natural philosophy, but in doing so he preserved them as recorded memory. In his treatises Meteorologica and On the Heavens, Aristotle outlines a taxonomy of celestial events. He distinguishes between stars, which he considered eternal and incorruptible, and transient phenomena which he attributed to vapors and exhalations rising from the earth. Comets, meteors, and shooting stars, in his view, were the ignition of these vapors in the upper air. Luminous clouds, halos around the moon, and sudden bursts of flame across the horizon all found a place in his naturalistic scheme. The heavens themselves were perfect, but the region below the moon, the sublunary sphere, was subject to constant change. This rational approach did much to demystify the sky, yet some descriptions linger at the edge of explanation. Aristotle refers to reports of disks of fire that moved across the night, which he classifies as atmospheric exhalations ignited in strange forms. He also notes luminous globes appearing after storms, hovering briefly before fading. These he explains as collections of vapor, but the choice of words, disks, globes, wheels, echoes the imagery found in poets and historians. His explanations may differ, but the recorded appearances remain the same. One of Aristotle's strengths was his insistence on observation. He encouraged his students at the Lyceum to gather reports, to record what they saw, and to compare notes. In this way he preserved testimonies of phenomena we might now call unidentified aerial events. He may not have believed in divine chariots, but he did not ignore the testimony of luminous forms in the sky. Instead, he sought to place them within a framework of cause and effect, however provisional. It is telling that even Aristotle, who rejected myth as literal truth, felt compelled to acknowledge these sightings. He did not dismiss them as fantasy. He catalogued them. He argued for natural causes, but in doing so he admitted their reality as observed events. The philosopher's skepticism, rather than erasing mystery, ensured its survival in written form. To the Greeks, this rationalization was itself a form of reverence. The heavens were ordered, not arbitrary. The fiery wheels and disks were not tricks of gods but phenomena of nature. Yet for modern readers, Aristotle's careful descriptions sound uncannily like reports of aerial craft, luminous, round, moving deliberately. His explanations, though ingenious, may reveal the limits of his framework more than the phenomena themselves. Picture Aristotle in the shaded colonnades of the Lyceum, students gathered with tablets in hand. A traveler arrives with a tale. One night, after a storm, a radiant shield hovered above the fields. Aristotle strokes his beard, listens carefully, then declares it a product of rising vapors ignited in the air. The student dutifully records the account. The phenomenon is explained, yet preserved. In this way, the story survives, carrying its luminous image into history. Aristotle's legacy is vast. He gave Western thought its categories, its logic, its divisions of heaven and earth. Yet within his orderly system dwell fragments of anomaly, disks of fire, glowing globes, luminous shields. He sought to tame them with natural causes, but in preserving them, he left open the door for wonder. The machinery of heaven to Aristotle was rational and perfect, yet it still produced signs that defied full understanding. Thus the father of natural philosophy joins the chorus of voices preserving ancient aerial encounters. Where Plato saw cosmic engineering, Aristotle saw atmospheric exhalation, but both in their different ways acknowledged the same truth. The ancients looked up, and they saw luminous forms crossing their skies. After Plato's idealism and Aristotle's systematic order, later schools of Greek thought turned to the heavens with fresh questions. The Stoics, the Epicureans, and other Hellenistic philosophers inherited the tradition of luminous chariots, fiery wheels, and radiant globes, yet they filtered these through their own philosophies of fate, ethics, and cosmic law. For them, the sky was not merely a stage of unexplained wonders, it was the very fabric of destiny, woven with threads of fire and air, shaping human lives below. The Stoics, in particular, placed enormous emphasis on the concept of pneuma, the divine breath, or fiery spirit, that animated all things. To them, the cosmos was alive, infused with rational fire that moved in cycles. When reports came of fiery disks or radiant apparitions above the earth, Stoics were inclined to see them not as accidents, but as expressions of this cosmic order. Luminous vehicles in the sky could be interpreted as signs of fate itself, visible manifestations of the rational fire that governed both stars and men. Chrysippus, one of the great Stoic thinkers, argued that celestial phenomena were not random but purposeful, part of the grand cycle of conflagration and renewal. A blazing wheel across the night, a radiant shield above a battlefield, these could be read as messages from the divine reason, logos that ordered the universe. The gods did not intervene capriciously. They revealed themselves through the orderly machinery of heaven, which sometimes allowed mortals to glimpse extraordinary radiances. The Epicureans, by contrast, sought to demystify. For Epicurus and his followers, the heavens were made of atoms moving in infinite space. Strange lights were not divine messages, but natural events, products of celestial bodies colliding or releasing fiery streams. Yet even Epicurus admitted that humans would always interpret such events through the lens of awe. The imagery of flying chariots, though unnecessary to his atomic theory, persisted in the cultural imagination. Even skepticism could not erase the memory of luminous apparitions described by poets and witnesses alike. Hellenistic philosophers also expanded the Greek world's horizons, as Alexander's conquests opened contact with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India. Greek thinkers encountered parallel traditions: Egyptian solar barques, Babylonian fiery wheels, Sanskrit texts describing flying vehicles. For some, these parallels confirmed that aerial phenomena were universal, not confined to Greek soil. The same fiery presences appeared under different names, in different languages, across the ancient world. The Stoics could interpret this as proof of a single rational order, uniting all cultures. The Epicureans could see it as confirmation that natural phenomena were global, not local. Either way, the imagery of radiant conveyances endured. In the writings of later Platonists and Neo-Stoics, the idea of ethereal vehicles emerges. The soul, they said, possessed a subtle body, made of ether, capable of ascent through the heavens. This concept blurred the line between spiritual and technological imagery. To speak of an ethereal vehicle was to imagine not only myth, but mechanism, a conveyance of light, subtle and radiant, capable of transporting the soul beyond earthly bounds. Here, philosophy returned to the imagery of Homer's golden chariots and Hesiod's luminous hierarchies, but translated them into metaphysical language. Imagine a Stoic philosopher in the Stoa of Athens, listening to reports of a radiant globe that hovered over a harbor at night. He strokes his beard, nods, and declares it a manifestation of the cosmic fire, a sign that the order of fate continues. A skeptic beside him counters that it was only a vapor ignited by winds. Yet both acknowledge the same phenomenon, the same testimony. Neither denies that luminous forms appeared. They differ only in interpretation. Thus, in the Hellenistic world, aerial phenomena became part of a philosophical debate about destiny, nature, and the soul. The Stoics saw them as visible expressions of divine reason. The Epicureans dismissed them as natural fire. Later Platonists elevated them into vehicles of ascent, but through it all the luminous imagery persisted. Discs, wheels, radiant conveyances, moving deliberately across the sky. By the close of the Hellenistic age, Greek philosophy had absorbed centuries of poetic, historical, and eyewitness accounts of aerial anomalies. Each school offered its explanation, but none erased the testimony. The machinery of heaven remained radiant, mysterious, and profoundly influential. Whether divine message, natural fire, or ethereal vehicle, the lights in the sky continued to whisper of something beyond ordinary human grasp. Chapter 6. Parallels across the ancient world. Long before Greek philosophers formalized their ideas of celestial order, the Egyptians had been gazing skyward, weaving the daily journey of the sun into one of the most enduring myths of human history. To them, Re, the sun god, traversed the heavens in a radiant bark, a ship of light that sailed across the sky by day and through hidden waters of the underworld by night. When the Greeks came into contact with Egypt, whether through early trade or later conquest under Alexander, they recognized in these myths a familiar theme: radiant vehicles carrying divine beings across the firmament. The Egyptian solar bark was more than a poetic metaphor. Carved into temple walls, painted onto papyrus scrolls, and chanted in ritual hymns, it was presented with striking mechanical precision. Artists depicted oars, sails, and gleaming forms rising from the vessel. The gods rode as passengers in a structured craft that cut a clear path across the sky. Unlike Homer's fiery steeds, the Egyptian image was nautical, but its function was similar: a controlled journey of radiant movement above the earth. In the temples of Karnak and Luxor, reliefs show Re's bark defended by other gods against serpentine forces of chaos. At dawn, the radiant vessel rises, flooding the land with golden light. At dusk, it disappears below the horizon, embarking on a perilous voyage through shadowy realms, only to emerge again triumphant in the morning. This daily cycle was enacted in temple ritual, where priests carried miniature boats of gold and bronze, affirming their belief that the divine craft was real, its journey essential for life itself. For Greeks who traveled to Egypt, these traditions must have seemed at once exotic and familiar. Apollo's blazing chariot and Rhea's shining bark were images separated by culture, but united by concept. The sky as a thoroughfare, the sun as a radiant vehicle, the gods as pilots of luminous craft. Herodotus himself, when writing about Egypt, noted the profound reverence given to the solar journey, recording that the priests spoke of the sun's vessel with solemnity. While he offered no interpretation, his testimony preserves the sense of awe such imagery evoked. Archaeological discoveries reinforce the centrality of the barque. At Giza, pits around the Great Pyramid contained full-sized solar boats, buried for the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. Crafted from cedar, they were functional vessels, yet clearly symbolic of the divine ship that carried souls across the sky. One of these boats, painstakingly reconstructed, reveals intricate carpentry that suggests not only ritual purpose but advanced understanding of engineering. To the Egyptians, the journey of Re was not a vague metaphor, but a reality so vivid they built actual craft to mirror it. The Greeks, inheriting these images through contact and conquest, wove them into their own fabric of thought. Apollo's chariot began to share qualities with solar barques. The idea of radiant travel through both heavens and underworld resonated with the Eleusinian mysteries and Platonic myths of the soul's ascent. The cultural exchange enriched both traditions, suggesting that luminous vehicles in the sky were not unique to one people, but a shared Mediterranean inheritance. It is possible, too, that both Egyptians and Greeks were responding to similar observations. Lights moving steadily across the sky, radiant orbs appearing at dawn and dusk, strange glows above temples, all could be woven into the imagery of barques or chariots. Each culture chose familiar forms, wheels for the Greeks, boats for the Egyptians. Yet beneath the imagery lies a common memory, the sight of controlled radiant movement above. To stand on the banks of the Nile at sunrise, watching the golden disk rise above the horizon, was to see Re's bark appear in triumph. To stand on an Aegean headland at the same hour was to see Apollo's chariot emerge. Two cultures, two metaphors, one sky, alive with radiant vehicles that bound earth to the heavens. Beyond the deserts of Syria and across the fertile plains of the Tigris and Euphrates, another civilization gazed skyward with equal intensity. The Mesopotamians, Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians left behind tablets of clay and carvings in stone that reveal a long fascination with radiant forms above. Among their most enduring symbols is the winged disk, a circular form, often with rays or feathers extending outward, hovering above kings and temples. Scholars debate whether it represents the sun, divine authority, or something more enigmatic. Whatever its meaning, the imagery echoes the Greek and Egyptian traditions of luminous vehicles in the sky. Cuneiform text describe gods descending in fiery chariots, their movements marked by brilliance and sound. Shamash, the sun god, was often depicted as emerging from a radiant portal each morning, riding across the heavens with fire at his command. In hymns, he is said to judge the world from above, his vehicle illuminating both city and field. Like Apollo or Re, Shamash was not imagined as a distant abstraction. He was a radiant traveler, daily visible, his presence tied to an identifiable form of motion across the sky. The winged disk, carved into palace walls at Nineveh and Babylon, adds another dimension. Sometimes it encloses a figure, arms raised as though in command. Other times it is purely geometric, a perfect circle with symmetrical wings. Its shape suggests flight, control, and radiance. To those who lived under its gaze, it was a reminder that the gods traversed the skies, not in vague brilliance, but in structured forms, as though carried in vehicles of fire and light. Ancient chronicles also record unusual appearances. The Enuma Anu Enlil, a massive collection of omens, details fiery objects crossing the heavens, globes of light that lingered for days, and sudden flashes interpreted as divine warnings. These records are not poetry, but catalogs, carefully maintained by temple scribes. To them, each aerial anomaly had significance for kings and empires. A fiery wheel might foretell victory. A sudden glow might warn of famine or invasion. The systematic nature of these records places Mesopotamia among the first civilizations to treat aerial phenomena with something like scientific seriousness. The Greeks, through contact with Babylonian astronomy, inherited some of these traditions. By the 5th century BCE, Greek philosophers were already familiar with Mesopotamian star charts and omens. The imagery of fiery wheels and winged discs would have resonated with their own chariots and shields of light. In cross-cultural exchange, the sky became a shared text, each people writing in its own vocabulary, but describing experiences that overlapped. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over the winged disk. Was it purely solar symbolism? Was it a divine throne lifted above earth? Or was it, as some speculate, a stylized memory of radiant vehicles once witnessed in the sky? Its symmetry, its precision, its persistent presence across centuries suggest it carried more than metaphorical weight. To carve it above palace gates and temple thresholds was to proclaim that the skies were alive with structured power and that rulers themselves were guided by it. Picture a Babylonian priest standing on a ziggurat at dawn, scanning the horizon. The air is cool, the sky pale. Suddenly a glow appears, not the rising sun, but a sphere of brilliance moving against the background of stars. He notes it on his tablet. A fiery globe moved across the heavens. Days later, the omen is read before the king. Policy may shift, wars may be declared or delayed, based on that glowing form. In such moments, aerial phenomena were not distant curiosities, they shaped the fate of empires. Thus in Mesopotamia, as in Greece and Egypt, the skies were not silent, they were filled with radiant disks, fiery wheels and luminous journeys recorded with precision. Across cultures, the memory is consistent, structured light, controlled movement, presences that hovered above human life. The Greeks, inheriting these echoes, found in them confirmation that their own stories of flying chariots were part of a greater universal mystery. As Greek horizons expanded eastward with the conquests of Alexander, new traditions entered their field of vision. Beyond Persia and into the vast subcontinent of India, Greek soldiers and scholars encountered myths and texts that spoke of radiant vehicles unlike anything they had known. In Sanskrit literature, particularly in the epics Mahabharata and Ramayana, there were descriptions of Vimanas, flying machines of the gods and heroes, capable of traversing both earth and sky. To Greek ears already attuned to images of radiant chariots, these accounts must have sounded strangely familiar, yet grander, more technical, more explicit in their detail. The Ramayana describes the Pushpaka Vimana, a magnificent aerial craft belonging to the god Kubera, later used by the hero Rama. It is said to shine like the sun, to move at the will of its pilot, and to carry many passengers at high speed. The text speaks of the craft hovering, ascending and descending with precision, like a palace that could take flight. In the Mahabharata, other Vimanas are depicted as machines of war, capable of launching beams and projectiles, illuminating the skies with their brilliance. Such language transcends metaphor. It reads like a memory of technology. For Greeks who heard these stories through interpreters and travelers, the parallels to their own imagery were clear. Apollo's radiant chariot, Zeus's thunderbolts, Athena's luminous interventions, all resonated with the Vimana traditions of radiant aerial vehicles. But the Indian texts offered a scale of detail beyond the Greek, including descriptions of propulsion, movement without wings, and control by thought or command. To those raised on the Homeric epics, this sounded like the next step in the same language of divine flight. Cultural exchange after Alexander's campaigns likely spread these stories westward. In cities like Alexandria, where Greek and Indian scholars met, the comparison of chariots and vimanas must have stirred wonder. Was the imagery coincidental, or did it reflect a universal memory of luminous vehicles witnessed across continents? The consistency of form, radiant, structured, controlled, suggests that these were not isolated inventions. Rather, they may be fragments of a shared human experience. The Sanskrit texts also emphasize the moral dimension of flight. Vimanas are not toys but instruments of destiny. They can elevate heroes, punish the unjust, and carry souls between realms. This aligns with the Greek tradition, where flying chariots were never idle, but always purposeful, to deliver wisdom, to enforce justice, to mark divine intervention in human affairs. The convergence of meaning across cultures strengthens the impression that the imagery was rooted in something experienced, not simply imagined. Archaeologists and linguists continue to debate the origins of Vimana descriptions. Some see them as symbolic metaphors for spiritual ascent. Others argue they preserve memories of technologies long lost. Regardless of interpretation, their impact on Greek thought was real. The encounters of Alexander's soldiers with Indian sages introduced the Mediterranean world to a tradition of aerial vehicles that matched, and in some ways exceeded, their own myths. Imagine a Greek soldier stationed near the Indus, sitting by the fire as a local storyteller recounts the tale of Rama ascending in a shining palace that flew like the sun itself. The soldier, thinking of Apollo's chariot, nods in recognition. The forms are different: horses and wheels on one side, radiant palaces on the other, yet the essence is the same. Both cultures speak of luminous conveyances in the sky, piloted by gods, carrying destinies. Thus the Greek encounter with Sanskrit wisdom expanded their sense of the possible. Their own radiant chariots no longer stood alone, but formed part of a global chorus of skyward traditions. From Egypt's solar barques to Mesopotamia's winged discs and India's flying palaces, the message was clear. Humanity had always looked upward, and everywhere they had seen radiant vehicles traversing the heavens. Chapter 7. The Battle Skies of Antiquity. Few figures in history embody the marriage of myth and conquest like Alexander the Great. Born in Macedon, tutored by Aristotle, and driven by visions of divine destiny, he carried Greek culture across 3 continents. Yet alongside his campaigns of earth and empire came stories of the skies, luminous apparitions, and radiant forms that accompanied his armies. Chroniclers from both Greek and Eastern traditions preserved accounts of strange objects above battlefields, interpreted as signs of divine favor. Whether allegory, omen, or memory of aerial phenomena, these stories became inseparable from Alexander's legend. One of the earliest accounts describes the siege of Tyre in 332 BCE, as Alexander's forces struggled against the fortified island city. Some sources mention shields of fire appearing in the sky. These radiant discs, described as gleaming and maneuvering above the harbor, were taken by soldiers as a promise of divine assistance. Soon after, Alexander's forces breached the city's defenses. The apparitions may have been remembered less for their form than for their timing, lights in the heavens coinciding with victory on earth. Later, during his campaigns in India, chroniclers report luminous globes hovering above the army. Some speak of them darting across the night sky with sudden speed, others of hovering lights that seem to observe the marching columns. Alexander himself, steeped in the tradition of omens, is said to have interpreted these as confirmations of his divine mission. To soldiers who had grown up hearing Homer's verses of radiant chariots, the lights appeared as the gods of their youth, now traveling with them in foreign lands. The encounter at the Hyphasis River offers another example. As Alexander contemplated pushing further into India, his men grew weary, resistant to endless conquest. Chroniclers describe unusual lights above the river, fiery forms that flickered and then vanished. Some soldiers saw them as warnings from heaven, urging restraint. Others saw them as signs of destiny, urging their king onward. In the end, Alexander turned back, perhaps swayed by the interpretation of these celestial portents. The skies in this telling influenced the course of empire. Modern historians tread carefully with such accounts. Some dismiss them as embellishments added by later writers, seeking to glorify Alexander with divine associations. Others note that ancient chroniclers were often precise in separating rumor from record. The consistency of luminous imagery, shields, globes, radiant forms, across sources suggests that something unusual was indeed observed. Whether natural phenomena, atmospheric effects, or encounters with the unexplained, the apparitions left impressions strong enough to be woven into history. For the Greeks who followed Alexander, the connection between aerial signs and destiny was natural. Their ancestors had seen Athena gleam above battlefields, and Zeus hurl radiant bolts from Olympus. To see glowing discs in the night sky was not shocking, but expected, confirmation that the machinery of heaven still attended human affairs. The soldiers marched with more confidence, believing themselves under the watch of gods who traveled not only in myth, but in visible brilliance above. The legend of Alexander's cosmic campaign grew in later centuries. Roman writers repeated the stories, adding detail to the apparitions. In some versions, the lights took the form of fiery shields, in others of flying chariots, drawn by luminous steeds. In Eastern traditions, Alexander was sometimes remembered as accompanied by heavenly guardians who rode radiant vehicles. Across cultures, the essence remained. The conqueror's path was lit by signs in the sky. Imagine the scene: a vast army encamped beneath foreign stars, campfires glowing on the plain. Suddenly, a sphere of light appears overhead, hovering in silence. Thousands of eyes look upward. Murmurs ripple through the ranks. Is it Apollo watching? Is it a local god warning? Or is it something beyond any name? The apparition fades, but the memory endures, told and retold, until it enters the chronicles. Thus, Alexander's campaigns became not only tales of conquest, but of cosmic accompaniment. His armies marched across deserts and rivers, but also beneath radiant skies, alive with signs. Whether divine or unexplained, these aerial phenomena fused with his legend, reminding us that in antiquity, no empire was built without the gaze of the heavens. Across Greek history, Battlefields were never only contests of men and arms. They were also theaters where the heavens themselves were believed to intervene. Soldiers marched beneath skies that could suddenly blaze with omens. Generals weighed decisions against celestial portents, and chroniclers preserved accounts of luminous forms that appeared above armies at decisive moments. Among the most striking of these reports are the sky shields, radiant discs, gleaming like polished bronze, seen gliding or hovering during times of conflict. Several classical sources mention such apparitions at Chaeronea, where Philip II of Macedon secured his dominance over Greece. Local traditions later spoke of radiant shields drifting above the plain, interpreted as signs of divine judgment. During the Persian Wars, Herodotus preserved accounts of fire-like forms above battle lines, regarded as encouragement from the gods. Later Roman writers, drawing on Greek chronicles, describe round, fiery objects hovering over armies, moving deliberately before vanishing. The consistency of the imagery, shields of light, discs of fire, suggests a tradition rooted not only in symbolism, but in actual observation. The metaphor of the shield was natural to Greek soldiers. Every hoplite carried the aspis, a great round shield of bronze and wood, gleaming when polished, radiant when catching the sun. To see a luminous disk in the sky was to see the weapon of the gods, hovering like a divine counterpart to the soldier's own armor. Such imagery reinforced the belief that the gods fought alongside men, projecting their protection or judgment from above. Inscriptions and votive offerings confirm the association. At sanctuaries dedicated to Zeus and Athena, small bronze shields were left in thanks for signs in the heavens that guided armies. Some are inscribed with phrases such as, "to the gleam above the field," suggesting gratitude not merely for metaphorical favor, but for visible phenomena. Archaeologists have uncovered shield-shaped offerings in Boeotia and Attica, many dated to times of recorded conflict, strengthening the link between battlefield apparitions and cult practice. The psychological effect of such sightings was immense. In the chaos of war, the sudden appearance of a radiant shield above the horizon could sway morale. Soldiers who believed the gods were present fought with renewed courage. Enemies who interpreted the sign as a warning faltered in fear. Commanders understood this power, and chroniclers ensured the memory endured. Whether literal or symbolic, the sky shields became part of military history, shaping outcomes as surely as swords and spears. Modern interpretations range from atmospheric optics, sundogs, halos, reflections of light on clouds, to more enigmatic possibilities. Yet ancient descriptions often emphasize movement, shields that glided across the sky, paused, or darted suddenly. These qualities resist easy natural explanation. To the witnesses, they were deliberate, controlled, and undeniably real. Imagine a Greek hoplite on a ridge, shield strapped to his arm, spear in hand. The clash of battle rises below, but his gaze is fixed on the heavens. There, above the smoke, glows a disk of brilliance, silent yet unmistakable. He feels a surge of certainty. Athena herself is present. His courage steadies, and he plunges back into the fray with conviction that victory is ordained. Later, around campfires, the story spreads. By the time it reaches the hands of historians, it has become part of the enduring memory. Shields were seen in the sky. These sky shields remind us that for the Greeks, warfare was never purely human. Every clash was set against a cosmic backdrop. Victory or defeat was interpreted not only by strategy, but by the signs overhead. The round, radiant forms seen above battlefields fused martial imagery with celestial wonder, convincing soldiers that the heavens themselves bore witness to their struggle. The Greeks did not wage war only for land or power. Often they fought for sacred causes, disputes over sanctuaries, oracles, and divine authority. These conflicts, remembered as the sacred wars, carried with them a heightened expectation that the gods themselves would intervene. And in the chronicles of these struggles, we again encounter luminous presences in the sky, radiant forms that soldiers believed revealed divine favor or displeasure. The first sacred war, fought in the early 6th century BCE over control of Delphi, left behind stories not only of sieges and strategies, but also of heavenly signs. Later accounts speak of radiant lights appearing above the sanctuary, interpreted as Apollo defending his oracle. Some describe fiery streaks crossing the sky during critical moments, taken as warnings to aggressors. For those who fought, these signs reinforced the conviction that the battle was not theirs alone. The very heavens had joined the conflict. During the Third Sacred War in the 4th century BCE, similar reports arose. Chronicles mention gleams like shields above the battlefield near Delphi. Pilgrims later claimed to have seen bright apparitions above the temple, visible even at midday. Priests interpreted these as Apollo's intervention, protecting his precinct from desecration. Whether natural or not, the appearance of luminous forms above a sanctuary carried immense psychological weight. Armies hesitated, generals reconsidered, and ordinary soldiers felt the presence of gods pressing upon their decisions. The imagery of divine intervention through radiant forms was not confined to Delphi. Other sanctuaries recorded similar events. At Dodona, the oracle of Zeus, inscriptions speak of flashes of the Father's light, seen during times of strife. At Eleusis, guardians of the mysteries claimed that radiant apparitions appeared in the skies during attempts to disrupt the rites. These testimonies reveal a pattern. When sacred places were threatened, luminous presences appeared to defend them. To the Greeks, such appearances were not metaphors. They were experiences. Imagine standing in the shadow of the temple of Apollo as armies clashed in the valley below. The air is tense, the sound of bronze on bronze echoing through the mountains. Suddenly, a glow emerges above the ridge, a shining form, disc-like, lingering in silence. Soldiers drop their weapons, priests lift their arms, and the crowd murmurs, "Apollo has come." The moment is seared into memory, passed down until it becomes history itself. Philosophers later debated whether these apparitions were divine signs or natural phenomena. Aristotle might classify them as fiery vapors. Stoics might see them as manifestations of cosmic reason. But to the soldiers and pilgrims, such distinctions were meaningless. The presence of light above a sanctuary at the moment of conflict was proof enough. The gods had intervened. These accounts also reveal the deep intertwining of religion and warfare in the Greek world. Victory was not only the result of tactics or numbers, but of divine will. Sacred wars were fought with the conviction that heaven itself would weigh in, and luminous phenomena confirmed those beliefs. Temples became not only spiritual centers, but stages where celestial power revealed itself. Modern interpreters may search for natural causes, halos, meteors, or reflections, yet the consistency of form, the timing during crises, and the cultural weight placed upon these appearances suggest something more. Whether born of nature or beyond it, the luminous signs became decisive forces in human affairs. They altered morale, justified victories, and sanctified defeats. Thus, the sacred wars remind us that in antiquity, conflict was never merely earthly. The skies themselves were enlisted, their radiant phenomena woven into the narratives of gods and men. Above battlefields and sanctuaries, luminous forms glided and flashed, persuading witnesses that the divine had taken sides. For the Greeks, these celestial interventions confirmed that the gods did not dwell apart from human struggles. They descended, gleaming, to fight in the skies above. Chapter 8: The Eternal Questions of Wonder. As centuries passed, and the voices of poets, historians, and philosophers blended into the fabric of memory, the question lingered: what did the ancients truly see in their skies? Were the flying chariots of Homer, the fiery shields of Livy, and the radiant apparitions of Plutarch only metaphors, or do they conceal fragments of actual encounters? To approach these mysteries today, scholars and archaeologists attempt to decode the ancient sky, piecing together texts, artifacts, and environmental clues to understand how luminous phenomena were perceived, and perhaps what they might have been. Archaeology offers the first clues. Temple alignments across Greece reveal deliberate attention to the heavens. At Delphi, the Temple of Apollo faces the rising of specific constellations associated with the god. At Eleusis, shafts of light at dawn pierced the telesterion during certain rites, bathing the hall in sudden brilliance. These alignments suggest that sacred architecture was designed to harness celestial events, yet they also reveal that the ancients were skilled skywatchers, attuned to every anomaly. When they described sudden gleams or hovering disks, they were not strangers to the ordinary patterns of the sky. They knew when something was unusual. Ancient inscriptions reinforce this. Fragments of marble steels mention a gleam brighter than fire, or a shield seen above the city. These are not poetic epics but civic records, meant to preserve memory. One inscription from Boeotia records that sacrifices were offered after a radiant form appeared in the heavens, a sign interpreted as divine protection. Such records blur the line between ritual and report. The gleam may have been natural, but its impact was preserved with the seriousness of history. Modern science provides possible explanations. Some phenomena, like halos around the moon, meteors, or ball lightning, can mimic the descriptions of radiant shields and fiery wheels. Comets, with their long luminous tails, often triggered waves of awe and fear. Yet even when natural explanations are plausible, the precision of some accounts raises questions. Reports of objects hovering, moving deliberately, or reappearing after vanishing do not fit neatly into meteorology. These qualities suggest either misperception or memory of something that truly resisted classification. Textual analysis deepens the puzzle. When Homer describes Athena descending in a gleam like a star, the simile emphasizes speed, brilliance, and control. When Plutarch writes of fiery forms above a naval battle, his tone is sober, matter-of-fact. These are not careless images, but carefully chosen words. Linguists note the recurring vocabulary: disk, shield, wheel, chariot. Across centuries and cultures, witnesses reached for the same shapes to describe what they saw. The consistency suggests continuity, perhaps a shared experience of phenomena that left too strong an impression to vanish from memory. Even philosophers wrestling with natural explanations preserved the anomalies. Aristotle's disks of fire were explained as atmospheric vapors, yet by naming them at all, he admitted their occurrence. Stoics treated luminous phenomena as signs of fate, weaving them into cosmic law. Epicureans dismissed them as natural accidents, but still recorded them. In every case, the events remained stubbornly present in the record, demanding interpretation. Archaeological digs sometimes reveal more direct hints. At sanctuaries, bronze votives shaped like shields or discs are inscribed with thanks for the gleam above. These objects, held in the hand and placed at altars, suggest encounters personal enough to demand offering. To dedicate a model shield to a god after seeing a radiant shield in the sky was to integrate the phenomenon into daily devotion. The boundary between experience and ritual blurred, preserved in metal as well as in memory. To decode the ancient sky, then, is to walk a narrow path between skepticism and wonder. Natural explanations clarify some, but not all. Cultural context explains symbolism, but not the persistence of form. What remains is a chorus of voices, insistent that luminous presences were seen, remembered, and revered. The ancients did not imagine their skies empty. They saw them alive with radiant conveyances, and they left enough fragments in stone and verse to ensure that we too would wonder what once glided above their world. When we gather the fragments of ancient testimony, the poet's chariots, the historian's shields, the philosopher's luminous globes, and the votive offerings inscribed with gratitude for radiant forms, we face a question that has echoed through centuries. How should these accounts be understood? Were they allegories crafted to elevate human imagination, or records of encounters with phenomena beyond conventional explanation? Between skepticism and belief lies a spectrum of interpretation, and it is along this spectrum that much of the wonder resides. At one end are the scholars who treat the imagery as purely symbolic. In this view, Homer's chariots are nothing more than poetic flourishes. Hesiod's luminous hierarchies, allegories of natural cycles, and Plutarch's fiery apparitions, literary devices to lend weight to political events. According to this perspective, the ancients spoke in metaphor, using the vocabulary of shields, wheels, and chariots to make sense of forces they could not describe otherwise. The flying chariots were never meant to be taken literally, but as cultural poetry that elevated human experience into myth. Others adopt a more cautious stance, acknowledging that some of these descriptions may reflect actual celestial or atmospheric phenomena. Meteors, comets, auroras, and ball lightning can indeed produce brilliant sights that linger in memory. A fiery streak across the sky could become Apollo's chariot. A hovering globe of light might be remembered as a divine shield. This approach honors the sincerity of ancient witnesses while situating their experiences within the framework of natural science. It accepts that what they saw was real, but interprets it through the lens of environmental phenomena. Yet a third position exists, one that entertains the possibility that some descriptions preserve encounters with the truly unexplained. The insistence on form, circular shields, radiant discs, wheeled chariots, recurs too consistently to be dismissed as chance. Accounts of hovering, of sudden darting movement, of controlled descent do not align easily with meteors or storms. These qualities, preserved across centuries and cultures, hint that ancient eyes may have witnessed phenomena that resist both metaphor and meteorology. The ancients themselves occupied this middle ground. They did not separate imagination from observation, nor dismiss signs as illusions. To them, a luminous form in the sky was both a phenomenon and a message. It could be Apollo arriving in his chariot, Athena descending in radiant splendor, or Zeus unleashing his thunderbolts. The question of what it really was did not trouble them as it does us. What mattered was meaning, the presence of the divine in human affairs, made visible in light. This spectrum of interpretation persists in modern times. Some scholars, tracing the consistency of descriptions, see in them a long human tradition of encoding aerial phenomena in myth. Others, more speculative, suggest that the ancients may have preserved genuine encounters with advanced aerial vehicles, remembered imperfectly, but with enough detail to spark recognition. Between these poles lies the fertile ground of curiosity, where history and possibility coexist, and where questions remain open. Consider the atmosphere in which these accounts were first received. A farmer hearing Hesiod speak of radiant vehicles did not ask whether it was allegory or natural science. He listened with reverence, recalling the strange light he had seen once over his fields. A soldier hearing Plutarch's tale of fiery globes above battle did not demand explanation. He remembered his own night beneath the stars, when a disk of brilliance hovered silently, filling him with awe. For them, the spectrum of interpretation was not a dilemma, but a reality. The skies were mysterious, and mystery was part of life. Modern archaeology and comparative mythology invite us to honor both perspectives, the poetic and the literal, the natural and the extraordinary. To read the ancients with respect is to allow for metaphor without denying experience, to accept natural phenomena without excluding mystery. In that balance lies the enduring power of their testimony. The spectrum of interpretation does not close the question. Instead, it keeps it alive, reminding us that human beings have always looked upward and wondered. The ancients, with their shields of fire and radiant chariots, left us not answers, but invitations. Invitations to stand beneath the same sky, to feel the same awe, and to ask anew what luminous presences might still glide above us, whispering through the ages. When we read of Homer's blazing chariots, Hesiod's luminous hierarchies, or Plutarch's fiery globes above battlefields, it is tempting to consign these stories to the distant past, the realm of myth. Yet as modern eyes scan the sky and modern instruments record strange lights and objects, the parallels become difficult to ignore. Across centuries, the same questions echo. What are these luminous forms? Why do they appear? And what meaning do they carry for those who witness them? Ancient eyes and modern observers share the same awe, the same uncertainty, and perhaps even the same encounters. Consider the language. The ancients spoke of shields in the sky, chariots of fire and wheels of light. Today, reports use words like discs, craft, and orbs. The terminology has changed, shaped by technology and culture, but the imagery remains circular, radiant, structured, and deliberate. Witnesses, ancient and modern alike, describe hovering, darting, or sudden brilliant descents. Both groups reach for familiar metaphors, shields for soldiers, aircraft for pilots, but the essence is consistent. The sky reveals forms that do not behave like stars, storms, or known machines. Modern sightings reinforce this continuity. Military pilots in recent decades have described luminous objects outpacing jets, executing impossible maneuvers, and lingering silently above oceans. Civilian witnesses recount disks of light hovering over highways, fields, or cities. Scientific instruments capture unexplained radar returns, infrared signatures, and visual anomalies. Though technology has advanced, the sense of mystery endures. In many ways, the Greeks of antiquity would recognize in these modern accounts the same presence they once interpreted as Athena, Apollo, or Zeus. The psychological impact is also strikingly similar. Ancient armies rallied when radiant shields appeared overhead, convinced the gods were with them. Modern witnesses often describe feelings of awe, humility, or even dread when confronted with luminous craft. Both responses suggest that such phenomena strike at something primal, the sense that humanity is not alone beneath the sky, that we are observed, accompanied, or judged by powers beyond ourselves. Scholars sometimes argue that the ancients, lacking scientific vocabulary, wrapped their observations in myth, yet modern accounts, despite our advanced technology, often fall back on metaphor too. Pilots speak of tic-tac objects, glowing orbs, or flying saucers. Engineers may describe propulsionless movement or electromagnetic effects, but the core testimony remains visual and emotional. Something radiant, controlled, and unexplained was seen. This continuity across eras hints at a phenomenon that transcends culture, appearing differently only because language and worldview differ. Archaeology adds depth to this continuity. The votive shields, dedicated in sanctuaries, mirror the miniature models of discs that modern enthusiasts create when recounting their sightings. Inscriptions of thanks for the gleam above echo the testimonies written in today's journals and reports. Even the psychological frameworks are similar to the ancients. Luminous forms signaled divine presence. To the moderns, they suggest advanced intelligence. In both cases, the sky remains alive with meaning, never neutral, never empty. Imagine a line of continuity stretching across time, a Greek farmer in Boeotia, gazing upward to see a radiant wheel pass silently above, a Roman soldier on campaign, watching fiery shields linger over the battlefield, a Renaissance chronicler sketching a hovering disk over Nuremberg, a modern pilot recording an infrared video of a darting object over the ocean. Each, in their own way, becomes part of the same dialogue, human eyes meeting luminous forms and struggling to name them. The modern world may offer tools that the ancients lacked: telescopes, satellites, radar, infrared sensors. Yet the heart of the mystery remains the same. We see lights that resist explanation. We feel awe that resists dismissal. We ask questions that do not yield final answers. In this sense, modern eyes stand shoulder to shoulder with ancient witnesses, gazing into the same heavens and experiencing the same enduring wonder. Thus, the testimony of antiquity is not relic, but companion. It reminds us that what we see today is not unprecedented. The Greeks, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Indians all looked upward and saw radiant conveyances in their skies. Their words survive to assure us that we are not the first to wonder. Ancient eyes and modern questions form one long story, whispered across millennia, inviting us to continue the search with humility and awe. The Aegean night has grown quiet. Waves touch the shore with the same rhythm that soothed ancient sailors, and the constellations overhead trace their eternal paths across the sky. The ruins of temples stand in pale moonlight, marble columns leaning, inscriptions weathered, steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. Where once priests lit incense and poets sang of radiant gods, there is now silence. Yet in that silence, the whispers of ancient skies endure. To walk among these ruins is to sense the weight of time and the persistence of wonder. The people who gathered here were no different from us. They tilled their fields, raised their children, built their cities, and then when night came, they looked upward. What they saw they carried into verse, into stone, into ritual. Chariots of fire, shields of light, radiant discs gliding above battlefields. These were not idle fancies, but memories worth preserving. We, too, look upward and sometimes glimpse the inexplicable. In this way, the chain of wonder remains unbroken. The poets gave voice to awe, describing gods in radiant vehicles who crossed the heavens with speed and brilliance. The historians preserve testimonies of luminous shields that appeared before battles, recorded not as fantasy, but as fact, worthy of remembrance. The philosophers wrestled with these mysteries, some explaining them as natural, others as symbolic, still others as signs of cosmic machinery. And across the wider world, cultures echoed the same imagery. Egypt's solar barques, Mesopotamia's winged discs, India's flying Vimanas, separate voices, yet all telling of radiant conveyances that moved through the sky with purpose. Now the temples are quiet, their fires long extinguished, but the sky above them remains unchanged. The same stars that guided Homer's wanderers and Alexander's armies wheel above you tonight. Their brilliance is constant, their silence profound. Yet perhaps, as in ages past, there are moments when the silence breaks, when a strange gleam lingers above the horizon, or a disk of brilliance hovers just long enough to stir the heart with awe. For the ancients, such moments were not curiosities, they were encounters with meaning. A farmer who saw a radiant shield above his fields offered thanks at a sanctuary. A soldier who glimpsed a fiery chariot above the battlefield believed his courage divinely confirmed. A pilgrim at Delphi who saw a gleam above the temple knew Apollo was near. These experiences were folded into their lives, shaping how they understood destiny, justice, and the soul's journey. We stand centuries later, with different words and tools, yet the questions remain. What are the luminous forms that cross our skies? Are they natural marvels, misunderstood by ancient eyes? Are they allegories, crafted by poets to give shape to mystery? Or do they hint at encounters beyond our knowledge, glimpses of visitors who have always been with us, gliding silently above the earth? The answer may remain elusive, but the wonder is eternal. As you rest now, imagine yourself standing among the ruins of a Greek temple, the marble cool beneath your hand, the air fragrant with olive trees and sea spray. The moonlight spills across the columns, and above them, the constellations shine. You feel the presence of all who came before: the poets, the historians, the philosophers, the soldiers, the farmers, the pilgrims. They are all here, in the memory of the stones, in the quiet of the night, in the endless dialogue with the sky. Allow the mystery to comfort you, rather than trouble you. The ancients accepted that not everything could be explained, and in that acceptance they found reverence. Wonder was a path to wisdom. Mystery was a companion to life. As you drift toward sleep, let that same reverence guide you. You do not need to solve the enigma of flying chariots or radiant shields. You need only to rest in the knowledge that you share with countless generations, the gift of looking upward and feeling awe. The waves will continue their rhythm, the stars will continue their course, the marble will stand in silence, carrying its whispers into the future, and you too can rest, held in the same embrace of wonder that carried the Greeks through their nights. Close your eyes now, and let the mysteries of the ancient sky drift gently into dreams. For the questions will remain when you wake, eternal companions, shining quietly above, as they always have, and as they always will.